Hi, thanks so much for tuning in. This is ET Now Spotlight and I'm Alex Matthew. This week, we're focusing in on the IT industry and specifically on the problem of attrition that they've been contending with. Not just companies here in India, but across the globe, new age companies, digital companies have been dealing with a boom in business ever since the pandemic struck. The result is that they need a lot more employees to drive that business growth. And there's been a no-holds-barred battle between the IT behemoths and the new age companies that need these engineers. You could call it a war of attrition. First, take a look at the context.
It's a great time to be an IT engineer. The outbreak of the pandemic forced people indoors, and the resultant boom in the use of digital services has meant the start of a super cycle for IT services companies. This rising demand for services has come in the form of multi-million-dollar deals and has ratcheted up the requirement for capable engineers. A battle for talent has ensued. In the quarter ended June, India's 5 largest IT companies added a total of over 53,000 employees on a net basis. And that means that nearly 4% of their cumulative workforce has been hired in just 3 months. That number is even more significant when you consider that these companies are contending with a historically high drain of talent. Employees are being lured away by competition by increasingly sweeter deals, causing a huge spike in the level of attrition in the past few quarters. The Big Five saw their rates of attrition rise by 25% on a sequential basis in the first quarter of this year. And what's more, the largest of the 5, Tata Consultancy Services, which was the only company that managed to keep its level of attrition in single digits in the first quarter, expects that the exodus of employees could in fact increase.
Job market is hot, 7.28 last quarter, 8.6 this quarter. These attrition rates are a little bit artificial because of pandemic. We normally operate at 11 to 12% attrition rate, and in peak times we have seen 13-14% as well. So this is this is something which we expect. If you say yes, will it go up? The chances of it going up are yes, they are high. But our operating model is robust enough to manage this.
The smaller companies face a tougher challenge. The likes of Mindtree and L&T Infotech, for example, have seen attrition rates spike 37 and 24% respectively. And Cognizant, which has over half of its employees in India, has had attrition rates spike by nearly 50%, with 1 in 3 employees heading for the exits during the quarter. Part of the reason for the increase in attrition, according to experts, is that in the current work-from-home environment, lateral hires are being preferred over freshers because freshers are harder to integrate into teams in such a scenario. And another factor is the changing nature of the skills needed to cater to the requirements being made by clients. In order to retain talent, IT companies have had no choice but to raise the level of compensation. Many have already hiked wages, having rolled out increments and promotions twice in just the past 2 quarters. In fact, the top 5 IT companies have seen their wage bills rise by an average of 8% sequentially and 16% from the first quarter of the last financial year. Though some part of that increase has had to do with hiring of new talent. The substantial rise in the wage bill hasn't hurt these companies too badly just yet. That's on account of the surge in deal wins and revenues. But margins have uniformly declined on a sequential basis across the industry, and they're expected to remain under pressure for a few quarters more. But beyond margin pressure, industry watchers warn that persistently high levels of attrition could result in loss of business going forward as clients look for continuity. And the winners of the war of attrition could end up grabbing a larger slice of the market. In Mumbai for ET Now, this is Alex Matthew.
Now, a conventional method to hold on to talent has been to offer an employee between 50 and 100% of their salary as a retention bonus that's payable after 2 or 3 years. And while that tactic is still being used across the board, there are a few new age companies that are offering slightly more unconventional rewards. Take for example Bharat Pay. It made headlines a short while back when it listed some mouth-watering prizes as part of a hiring drive for 100 employees to bolster its technology team. Some of the prizes included a BMW 310R Superbike and other motorcycles from Jawa, KTM and Royal Enfield, as well as a host of gadgets that also included the iPad Pro, Samsung Galaxy watches and even a Firefox bicycle. Ashnir Grover, who is the founder of Bharat Pay, felt that this was necessary to attract the top talent. Here's what he said.
Very early when I was in the US earlier this year, and I could see the founders there struggling to attract good engineering talent at whatever price. So when I came back, one thing I was very clear about is that we have to take the lead and we have to get good talent in. Interestingly, we put out that post on the BMW bikes. 6 lakh engineers, right, visited our website after going through all the hoops, because there was a lot of quizzes and things built into the application process itself. We have 25,000 quality engineering leads with us.
All right, so is the attrition problem that so many IT companies are facing simply a mismatch of demand and supply? And why is that? Because India produces so many engineers. Let's get some answers to those questions. Joining me now is Anirban Gupta, the associate partner at Aon. Thank you so much, Mr. Gupta, for taking the time. The first question that I have for you is that we've seen the numbers. We've seen quite a few companies report very, very high attrition over the last couple of quarters. And you make a study of this. What specifically is causing this spike?
Yeah. And as you can imagine, no answer is simple, right? And there are multiple layers if you start peeling this onion. I think the simplest way of looking at it is the demand spike, right? And I think after many years, and maybe since the last great recession, are we at a point where all the different sub-segments within technology are starting to boom, right? So you've got the IT services players that are, if you go by analyst reports, about to begin a journey of mid-double-digit growth over the next 3 to 5 years. And what that means is that they're out there looking for a lot more talent to start spurring some of the demand that they're seeing, right? And then if you look at the journey they've been on historically, most of them have pared benches down. Most of them have moved to a point of just-in-time hiring and to a point where you've got this massive demand spike happening because of the global post-pandemic environment. They're seeing greater attraction of and they're seeing greater need of talent which they haven't stocked yet, right? So that's one side of the journey. I think the other side of the journey that we saw is that India as a center, as a source of captive talent, right? Organizations setting up GICs or GCCs in India. If you go by published reports, what you expect is over the next few years, 1,000 more to set up. And they need ready talent. They don't have the bandwidth to train talent like the traditional IT service organizations do. And they're scouting the local environment for talent that's ready, making competitive offers and pulling them away. The third thing to look at is, and I think the pandemic's accelerated it, India's own digital consumption, right? Look at the number of startups we've got. Look at the rate at which Indian digital transactions are going up. All of that points to a huge demand for engineers to come into those organizations and help build them out for the future, right? And these are the more logical sides of it, right? These are facts, figures that are in front of us. I think as I speak to clients and as I talk more and more, I think there is also a degree of unrest in the employee population. While we may all sit in the comfort of our home and talk about how hybrid is the future and how virtual is great and stuff like that, I think we have to be cognizant that there are large portions of the workforce that's burning out. There are large portions of the workforce that don't understand the start and end to their day anymore. And in that environment, when you're stuck at home and you're pulling these really long hours, you want change. And unfortunately, changing family isn't an easy option, nor is it a desired option. Changing jobs is easy. So on one side, you've got a demand spike. On the other side, you've got a workforce that is more and more restless and wants to change something. And you've got the beginning of a perfect storm, right? And let me talk about the other side of the problem we were talking about, right? India is a country of engineers, but we can't seem to find enough of them. And in our business, we have this joke that you can find a Java engineer in India, and you can also not find one. And what that means fundamentally is, if you look at how India's constructed its technology jobs, at least over the last 5-10 years, it's industrialized it, it's broken it up into really small components, and it's built talent that can fit into that very easily. What digital is asking for is more end-to-end ownership, right? So if you've heard this term called the full stack isn't new, right? The full stack developer is a hot skill now. But if you talk to people who've been in the industry for 20 years, they'll say, well, every engineer 20 years ago was full stack, right? So we've gone through this process of breaking the job down. And when the digital use case is coming up, when you're looking for people who are better end-to-end problem solvers, who can understand the length and breadth of technology, who can build, who can deal with ambiguity, we've just not hit enough supply of that. So you've got this really small group of people that everybody wants and very few people get, right? I was with a client yesterday where they were talking about how another client of mine was picking up their talent at 70-80% increases. I met that client in the evening and said, I heard you're picking up people at massive increases. And they said, well, we're giving the increases, they're not joining us. Right? So the demand supply for technology with the layer of good problem solving, communication, learning agility is really rare in this country because of the way we've built our talent tradition.
I do want to come to the next point that I had, and you've already laid out some aspects of this, but are you looking at attrition very differently from, say, what you were looking at before the pandemic struck? In that the advice that you're giving your clients, is it different now?
Yeah, I think, and just before this, I was talking to a fairly large multinational technology client. I think what we have to be cognizant of is we are entering, and there's no other way of calling it, we're entering a seller's market right now, right? That in the past, and especially if you looked at the technology services space, the seller, in which case the employee, didn't have lots of options, right? We are entering an environment where the seller now has options. And when the seller has options in a market that's been traditionally constrained, you will see attrition spike, right? And we're doing this study right now, we're working with around a couple of hundred large tech firms in the country, where we're looking at offer reject rates. And offer reject rates right now in pockets, in digital skill areas, etc., are touching 40%, which is unheard of in the past, right? So I think I almost go back to the early 2000s, maybe 2005, 2006, when the Indian tech market was booming. You were dealing with high attrition, you were dealing with high offer rejects, and I think we have to get used to the fact that at least in the medium term, next couple of years, until you figure out alternative talent sources and figure out alternate supply channels, you will have this problem, right? So to traditionally look at attrition should be 10% and not higher in a market that is booming secularly, I don't think is the right way to start looking.
My last question is perhaps will be a little bit quicker. What, according to you, should companies do? And you say that this is a problem that could persist for the medium term. In the interim, what can they do to keep hold of their talent?
On a lighter note, pray. On a more serious note, I think what we have to be cognizant of is, and you spoke about few organizations that have historically low attrition, right? That even though everybody else is spiking, there are organizations that are at 10% and not higher. And fundamentally, it comes down to the employee-employer bond, right? Right now, what you've got is a group of employees that have turned mercenary because they understand that careers in the way our parents looked at it no longer exist, right? That you can't, or the chances of you joining a company and retiring from there is less common than not. And to counter the mercenary on the shorthand, is money the reason, money the play potentially? I think in the mid to long term, it's about rebuilding the trust, rebuilding the fiduciary responsibility employers have, and trying to convert the mercenary, right? Because in this game, if you're going to fight a mercenary with money, it's not going to be sustainable.
Absolutely. Mr. Gupta, thank you so much for putting all of that in perspective. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for being on ET Now Spotlight.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, let's now take a look at what some of the top IT companies and their managements have said about this problem of attrition that they're all faced with. And in fact, Saurabh Govil, who is the President and Chief Human Resources Officer at Wipro, believes that the high level of attrition will remain for at least a few more quarters, and hiring will have to be increased to compensate for that.
Attrition, as you know, has gone up. We had called it out last quarter that we will see an uptick in attrition. This is not only for us across the industry and across outside of the tech industry. It's the change in the market right now. It is something which we need to keep a close eye, and we have taken several actions to ensure that we contain this. But as we do that, we are also making sure that we have building enough robustness in a people supply chain so that it doesn't impact from a growth standpoint. But attrition continues to be a concern. We will be focused. We have taken several actions. I have called it out in the press conference. I can speak about it again. But we believe that it will remain at these levels for a couple of quarters before it starts coming down.
Now, Manish Sabharwal of TeamLease believes that the problem of attrition is caused by the fact that we've entered a super cycle for these IT companies, and there's not a problem of talent. Here's what he had to say.
The second wave was completely different from the first wave. I think corporate India had learned how to cope with lockdowns, and the digitization super cycle has kicked in. So I think the secular only guess you can make here is that 4 million IT employment goes to 10 million IT employment over the next near future. So for IT, it really is a super cycle that has been kicked off. India's has a good people supply chain for engineers. IT companies had started taking non-computer science engineers into technology a few years ago. In the last few years, we've even seen non-engineers go into software code writing. So I would say that I'm not sure, talent is the binding constraint for these companies. Of course, costs are going up, but, India produces more engineers than the US and China combined. And I think that any company who wants to recruit will recruit. Now, obviously, kids would prefer to get paid as much as they can, and companies would prefer to pay as low as they can, but that train has left the station for companies.
Now, one of the factors that will determine how quickly things return to normal as far as hiring is concerned is at what point these IT companies will move their workforces back to the workplace. Early on in the pandemic, there were some rumors that said that quite a few of these IT companies would move to a hybrid model, or in fact would have a large portion of their workforce work remotely on a permanent basis. But TCS, for one, is thinking of moving its employees back to the workplace in a phased manner. Listen in.
We will see the current SBWS operating model, where we have about 97% of our people working remotely, will swing the other way as this pandemic starts to lighten up. And then we'll go in a much more deliberate and controlled manner back to somewhere in that vision trajectory that we have laid out. So that's the kind of evolution that we see of the working environment when we look forward into the next 5 years.
Now, HCL Tech is looking to address the problem of attrition by stepping up its hiring of freshers, and that the management feels will keep a handle on the cost.
We are in a unique situation where there is very, very high demand, and the demand for talent offshore, especially in India, is the highest across any markets in the globe. Now, obviously, it's going to put some pressure of increased costs for a couple of quarters, maybe 3 quarters. But if we get the right the demand supply pipeline from a fresher engine, I think that should help moderate it. And our fresher engine is operational all across the world, and we are hiring 22,000 freshers in this financial year. And this was only 12,000 last year. We are almost doubling the fresher hiring compared to the last year. And once this engine kicks in and we have 22,000 freshers and further upscaling of our existing teams, I think it should moderate the cost pressure.
And finally, while some companies are looking further afield outside the boundaries of India to hire more, Tech Mahindra is going to continue to focus on India, and instead it is going to go beyond the metro cities, as it has already started doing, to the tier 2 cities. a strategy that has held it in good stead, according to CP Gurnani.
I believe that Tech Mahindra would be a net hirer around and across the globe. And we have development centers in Canada, US, Europe, UK, Ireland, and also in Philippines and different parts of Asia. Though, yes, the majority of the hiring will take place in India. I also believe that our investments into tier 2 cities of India, Nagpur, Trivandrum, Chandigarh, Bhubaneswar, will help us manage attrition a lot better, because we are one of the few companies which took a forward call to invest in the tier 2 cities. Number 3, yes, the demand is high, the growth is high, and we had earlier budgeted 16 to 18% attrition. Frankly, I will be watching the trend dynamically. If required, we will plan for additional hiring.
So that's the story on attrition in the IT services space. A lot of companies will have a headache to deal with, at least for the near term, but it's a good time to be an employee in this industry. And if you get a superbike in the bargain, well, it couldn't get better than that. That's all we have for you in this edition of ET Now Spotlight. It's been a pleasure bringing it to you. Thanks so much for watching and have a great weekend.